All right. Question for Eric from Hayato Nishiyama. I hear people talk about BCAAs all the time, but I really don't hear people talk about EAAs or essential amino acids. Essential amino acids are more expensive than BCAAs, but are they actually better? Or is it a waste of money like BCAAs are?
So this is a good question. Definitely BCAAs have had their place kind of up in the royal family of supplements in the bodybuilding world, or at least they had. I feel like they've kind of lost that foothold. But I don't know why. I'm not certain why the branched chain amino acids rose to prominence and the essential amino acids didn't. I think for a while there, Greg, am I crazy for thinking that for a while there just weren't any decent tasting EAA formulas out there? I feel like there were potentially flavoring issues that led people to go down the BCAA route.
I mean, possibly. I think a lot of that would probably depend on leucine dosing because leucine tastes terrible.
Yeah. So I don't know why the companies decided, hey, let's go all in on branch chains, but definitely if you looked at the market, just based on the products that were available, there was a lot more emphasis on branch chains than essential amino acids. And just to kind of set the framework here, so the branch chain amino acids are 3 amino acids that do happen to be essential amino acids, but an essential amino acid product just has the other essential amino acids as well. So the branch chains are basically a subcategory of the essential amino acids, and then there are also non-essential amino acids in the diet. Now, the reason the essential amino acids are important is because if you intend to do something crazy like build some muscle proteins, then you're going to need all the essential amino acids present in sufficient quantities. Now, as the asker of the question alluded to, the more popular opinion these days is that branched chain amino acid products probably have a lot more limited utility than we used to think, or than used to be kind of commonly thought. So back in the day, I mean, you were not going to find a bodybuilder that wasn't carrying around a gallon jug full of unusually purple water. And without question, the reason it was purple was because there were branched chain amino acids in it. And they would basically just sip on it all day like a leucine drip. And I think a lot of people were really into this idea. And by the way, leucine is one of the branched chain amino acids. But I think a lot of people were really into this idea that if you just kind of consistently sipped on branch chains, that it's like, okay, we're going to stay slightly anabolic, like pretty much around the clock. And with what we've learned about the temporal aspects of muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown, that doesn't seem to be a good strategy. So the people that were putting a lot of eggs in that basket, I mean, their water tasted better than it otherwise would have in most cases, but aside from that, it probably wasn't doing a ton for them. And to be honest, I just can't think of a super great use for branched chain amino acids. I can think of maybe some uses for essential amino acids, but really what we're getting at here with using an essential amino acid supplement, maybe you could argue that if someone was on let's say like a vegan diet on fairly limited calories, so they couldn't one of the tricky things about vegan diets is you have to make sure that you're getting enough protein intake that, you know, by putting all these different protein sources together, you're getting the essential amino acids you need throughout the day. And one of the challenges with that is finding vegan proteins that have diverse amino acid profiles that don't also have a decent amount of fat or carbohydrate in them. And so it can get pretty tough without supplementation to put together a low calorie, high protein vegan diet. It can get really challenging without question. Now, if you choose to consume a vegan diet, I got zero problems with that. Totally fine with that. But there are some challenges there when it comes to meeting those needs for amino acid intakes. So I could maybe see the utility of an essential amino acid product in that context. maybe, like, I know one way that people like to use this is for an intra-workout kind of deal, where they're like, oh, I want to have intra-workout protein, but in order to make digestion a little easier, maybe I'll, and maybe, uptake quicker, absorption, maybe I'll go with essential amino acids. I guess if you're comparing it kind of apples to apples there, the essential amino acids probably would make more sense, but I think there's a very limited number of people who really need to be having intra-workout protein supplementation. So even with that justification, I don't think it's I don't think you're likely to see a very big benefit from that personally. Maybe if you are about to do a pretty intense workout and you're like, you know what, I don't want to go in there completely fasted. I'd like to have some amino acids, some kind of amino acids in the bloodstream during and then immediately after the workout. If you wanted to do that, but you couldn't eat a full protein, a full intact food-based protein because your stomach cannot handle digesting those proteins during the workout, maybe there might be an application there. But the one thing I want to highlight is, as you can imagine, these scenarios that I'm constructing for trying to find a really good justified use for them, you have to start putting kind of like a few circumstantial factors together to make these scenarios. I personally think that the supplementation, I think the promise of branched chain and essential amino acid supplementation is very limited to very specific circumstances at best.
I can throw one out there that I do think applies to probably a non-negligible amount of people.
Sure. What do you got?
So I think that there's been a lot of backlash against BCAAs, probably to a degree that's not completely warranted. Because the thing is, I think a lot of the backlash is they were so hyped a few years ago, and now more and more research is coming in, and we realize like the level of hype we saw probably wasn't justified. But the thing is, there is a lot of research on branched chains and to a lesser degree essential amino acids, which probably are just as good as branched chains, if not slightly better. But there is a fair amount of work on branched chain amino acids looking at recovery from resistance training, to the point that there's a few meta-analyses at this point. And those metas do find that compared to a placebo, which is almost always maltodextrin, branched chain amino acids do improve recovery from exercise training. And so the problem is that even though there's, I don't know, probably 15 or 20 studies at this point comparing branched chains to a placebo, they've never been compared to just like straight up whey protein to see the effects on recovery from resistance exercise. And in all likelihood, we know protein does the same stuff. You give people protein versus a placebo, protein also improves recovery from resistance exercise. And so in all likelihood, branched chain amino acids don't do any better than protein and very well could be worse than protein for recovery from resistance exercise. So that's like a glaring hole in the literature. But one thing to note just from a practical perspective is that a lot of people, and myself included here, so I don't use branched chain amino acids, but I kind of think I probably should, because I don't want to eat directly after a workout. I kind of get around that because I'm one of the weird people who can eat a lot right before a workout and I'm totally fine. But especially with using protein supplements, if I use particularly whey protein within an hour of finishing a training session, it always makes me feel nauseated. And, if I'm hot and like a little overheated from a training session, I don't want to immediately go home and eat a huge meal. Like I probably don't really want to eat again until maybe two-ish hours after a training session. And so in my case, if I would be comparing branched chain amino acids against nothing, branched chain amino acids very well might help me. I don't use them because I'm cheap as fuck, but I do know, and this is feedback I've heard from a lot of people when I have shit on branched chain amino acids in the past, where they're like, I just can't consume protein around workouts. Like, it always makes me feel really nauseated. I don't have much of an appetite, but I can sip on branched chain amino acids, and that's totally fine. And so, like, I don't think that applies to a large majority of people, but if you do compare branched chains against nothing, it is better than nothing. Like, that is something you can confidently say about it. So if you're someone who just doesn't want to consume protein around a training session because it like upsets your stomach, makes you feel nauseated, you probably will get some utility from branched chain amino acid supplementation.
Yeah, so I did mention that scenario in the pre-exercise context, but I didn't think about the post because that's never been a problem for me. Mm-hmm. I'm the opposite. I struggle to train on a full stomach, but right after I can eat usually.
Yeah.
But that would make sense. In that scenario, I would speculate that an essential amino acid product, I would speculate, would probably be even a better option.
No, I agree.
Than branched chain amino acids. So to answer the question, I would say most of the places where you can really justify using either branched chains or essential amino acids, I do think that you would at least be inclined to slightly have a more favorable view of the essential amino acids because I just think there's inherent benefit to having a more complete amino acid profile than just the branched chains in that supplement. So, the two most likely scenarios playing the numbers, as we mentioned, you don't have the stomach for having whole intact proteins that require greater digestion, before or after a workout, or you are consuming a diet that is mostly plentiful in lower quality proteins. So I'm thinking usually a vegan diet, and you are simply using it to supplement the amino acid profile of some of those lower quality proteins. I want to limp into the discussion here with a couple takes that I'm not fully committed to. So a couple recent things that are just my bias, generally speaking, is to lean toward food when food can work, and then when it can't work, then embrace supplementation. So I'm not anti-supplement by any means, but for me, I'm always thinking, what is it going to take to shift me away from a food and toward a supplement? Or if a supplement just cannot be obtained from food, then that decision is easy. But with amino acids, I'm always thinking, why am I not going to have a delicious hamburger? And instead, I'm going to have some kind of weird amino acid mixture replacing food. And so...
Or a weird and sad simulacrum of lasagna, potentially.
We'll talk about that later. So there was a review paper by a few authors that I would just mispronounce all of their names. Yongqing Ho, Yulong Yin, and Wu. But this paper came out in 2015. If you want to search it, maybe we'll go with the title, not the author names there's no way you could possibly figure out how to spell those. Dietary essentiality of nutritionally non-essential amino acids for animals and humans. And basically what they were highlighting in the paper is that non-essential amino acids do play important roles in things like gene expression, cell signaling, digestion, absorption, DNA and protein synthesis, proteolysis, metabolism, endocrine status, a whole bunch of things that several non-essential amino acids play very critical roles in. And what the general argument they were making is that the extreme focus and emphasis on essential amino acids in the diet has maybe undersold the role that dietary non-essential amino acids play. So they were basically saying, hey, by calling them non-essential, we've really downplayed exactly how important it is to get some of these amino acids from the diet. There was also a very interesting paper in 2019. This one was called Branched Chain Amino Acids Impact Health and Lifespan Indirectly via Amino Acid Imbalance, or I guess it's Amino Acid Balance and Appetite Control. But when you read the paper, they're really focused on imbalance. But what they were doing, it was a rodent study, and they basically looked at these rats or mice, and they tweaked the branched chain amino acid content of their diets. And because there's long been this kind of weird observation that high branched chain amino acid intake seems to be associated with like diabetes and insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, what exactly is going on there? Because it's just an association, not necessarily a causal relationship. So a lot of times people see those associations and they say like, oh, branched chains are going to give me diabetes. But what they found with their study, again, it's one study, it's a rodent model. We don't know exactly how well it's going to translate over to humans. I'm by no means an amino acid metabolism expert. But what they found was that when they really ramped up the branched chain amino acid content of the diets, what they found was they basically induced an imbalance between the branched chain amino acids and essentially all the other dietary amino acids that would be taken in. And the ones that they really focused in on were tryptophan and threonine. And what they found was that this was associated with hyperphagia, which is an increased appetite, and central serotonin depletion. What they were getting at is that by drastically increasing the branched chain amino acid content of the diet, maybe by inducing this imbalance that would not typically be found in the normal protein sources of the diet for these animals, maybe that imbalance was triggering hyperphagia and some other unwanted kind of unintended consequences of altering that balance that caused them to essentially overeat. I'm completely limping in with very not strong takes on this, but there are at least some kind of rumblings in the literature that would make you think they basically support my bias that I came to the conversation with which is basically you have to convince me to move away from food toward amino acid supplementation, or at least give me good reason to believe that these are truly equivalent things that are worth swapping. So aside from the very special, because the reason I bring this up is everyone's always like, yeah, but what if I had this awesome, extremely supercharged diet that has like all these very complex, like I'm supplementing, all these different amino acids at all these different times because this is better than just a standard diet with plenty of protein in it. I have some reservations about getting super complicated about all these different dosing protocols for different amino acid mixtures. I think for me right now, unless you're in some of those really specialized scenarios that we talked about where we're like, okay, it makes a lot of sense to put in like branched chains or essential amino acids, barring those circumstances we already kind of put forward, I think generally speaking, if you're having a diet with sufficient protein that's got plenty of high quality protein sources in it, most of your amino acid needs are going to be met and really not worth getting too concerned about.